Anyway, we're recording, so whenever you guys want to
All right, cool. Well, apparently we're recording, Tim. So,
All right, great. Ready to go?
awesome. All right. So we're super excited today. We have a different type of live-ish stream. We are with Tim. He's all the way from Los Angeles. He's a storyboard artist, and we're going to talk to him after this. So, Tim, thanks for spending a little time with us and kind of like sharing what you do and all the great work that you kind of got going on. So I think it's kind of neat that we're able to do this sort of format with you, being in Los Angeles and being able to take the time for us. So what is a storyboard artist?
In the simplest terms, I like to describe the process of storyboarding or being a storyboard artist is kind of like being a comic book artist where you draw pictures that taken sequentially tell a story, like they're a visual blueprint. But unlike a comic book, whereas comic book is its own art form, storyboards are merely a blueprint that filmmakers use to pre-visualize, shots for all the films you see, the commercials, video games, all this visual content, because it's a great pre-planning tool. So it's essentially its own art form in a way, but it's really a means to an end where it's used by it's a filmmaker's pre-planning tool in the simplest sense.
So how did you get into this? I'm curious. Like, were you an artist first, or were you in film first, or both?
It was a little bit of both. As from an early age, I always enjoyed drawing. I always had a sketchbook with me, but I never really thought I could pursue a career with it. It was just a hobby. But at the same time, I always knew I wanted to work in the film industry. I wanted to make movies. I wasn't exactly sure what it was I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be part of that process. And I eventually went to film school, and that's where I was first introduced to storyboarding. I heard the term thrown around, but when it came time to make my own films, I had to, plan them out. Most people would just, write out a shot list, but me being the artist that I was, I just really enjoyed the process of drawing out quick pictures and figuring out how I'm going to film my films. And then it kind of just evolved from there. I realized I learned a little bit more about it, and I'm like, oh, I think I can make a career about this. So I really just it kind of went hand in hand. I actually got my start in the film industry, working on set as an assistant cameraman, fresh out of film school. So I got to be on the front lines and see how films are made, from the aspect from being a cameraman. But I always knew I wanted to be a storyboard artist at that point. So I little by little, while making money as an assistant cameraman, I started developing my storyboard career and letting people know I existed. Hey, this is what I want to do, and it just kind of went from there.
So, like, who do you basically work like on any given job? Not to be like too specific. I mean, are you working hand in hand with the director then, with producers? Tell me a little bit about the process of how some of these things come to life.
Yeah, as a storyboard artist, I rarely work with more than three people at a time. It is always the director. Usually, when I'm called for a job, it'll be from the producer or the director. But when I go into a meeting with the director, him and I, or her and I, are the ones that are basically going back and forth through this early process. Sometimes the cinematographer is involved, but that varies through projects. But really, it's myself and the director who are going back and forth because I always say, as a storyboard artist, I'm a second set of direct eyes for the director to kind of give them a way to figure out like what they want if they need the assistance. I've worked on films where a director will know exactly what they want and just look over my shoulder while I draw things out so they can pass the boards along to other people. I've worked on gigs where a director kind of has their ideas figured out in broad strokes, but kind of want someone to ping pong ideas back. And that's actually one of my favorite processes where I can kind of bring a little bit to the table. And then I've been on gigs where a director would be like, you know what, I'm up to my knees and all this other stuff. I don't have time to figure it out, make it look awesome, and just basically give me, free reign within the bounds of, what filmmaking, does in storyboards and go from there.
Yeah. So when you get in those early stages, with talking, to a director and kind of going through a story, your first initial sketches, are those more like content and like sequence based, or are you worrying about framings and camera angles and that kind of technical stuff at that point?
Yeah, I'm always thinking as a storyboard artist, technical, cinematic, aspect ratios. That's always like the forefront of what I'm doing. So I'm always conscious of that. Um, Even like with the rough sketches, I'm always drawing something sequentially, like because my idea when I first get into a project. And I kind of break down a script or a treatment. I want to make sure that shots are flowing visually, like everything looks, makes sense. And I like to describe it as the connective tissue. So, say for example, you got a character walks in a room, but he's got to get to the other end where the other character is looking. So you got to make sure visually you're conveying the action, the beats. So, like someone who's seeing these storyboards or seeing the film, they understand where they're at. Like, okay, we're at a wide shot, then we're at a medium. Okay, we were with this guy, but now he's over here. So I'm always thinking cinematically and how this is going to work. And that's another thing that differentiates storyboards from comic books, whereas comic books have more free reign. All the frames are different sizes, but storyboards have to abide by the rules of cinematography and filmmaking aesthetics because filmmaking follows certain formulas, and as a storyboard artist, it's important to implement those in your drawings, and of course, know what they are.
Yeah, is that generally how you start then? Like you mentioned, getting a script and breaking down the scene. When you're talking to a director, do they send you basically like that script ahead of time? You take a look at it and then kind of have kind of in your mind like where you think the breaks would be and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, every job is different. Feature films are a lot more in depth because I'll also get a treatment, which is basically just a whole booklet of like the director's vision about they'll show different frames from different films just to get a feel for, what their movie's going to be about, the visual language they want to utilize. That'll go with the script. A lot with commercials, it's a little bit more. Directors kind of have a pretty good idea what they want, so they'll give me like shots to break down. So yeah, it certainly varies, but films would be definitely the most visually involved because you really want to hit all the notes that the director is trying to convey. So like say for example, I have a script and I have to understand, what the director wants to convey. I can't just draw anything unless they tell me
Right.
to. I want to understand, we want to be on the same page, of the same mindset. So, like a lot of times when I go in for a meeting with the director on a film, I won't even draw anything. We'll just talk about his or her vision and, like what they want out of the storyboards and just basically the film as a whole.
Now, this is something, I mean, obviously that, like we're out in Cleveland and you're in Los Angeles today. Like, do you tend to work with people like, remotely, or is this kind of like a business where it's better to be in the same room with them, or how do you like to work?
Well, actually, when I first started, I always had to work with directors, like at least meet in person, and then I would like go off and work, remotely, and then I would bring, we meet up again. Nowadays, I can do a lot of stuff remotely. I mean, not just like directors in cities, but even here in Los Angeles, there have been jobs where we just exchanged emails. I never even met the director in person. There's other gigs where we'll just have a quick coffee and touch base real quick, and then I'll go off and do my thing. And we'll see each other again. So it certainly varies. But to answer your question, I can definitely even in a city like Los Angeles, I can work remotely and not even need to have a director and I be in the same room together, be able to accomplish what they need to. But again, it really depends on what the director needs, and if they prefer to have a one-on-one in person, I'm totally fine with that. But a lot of times, so many wheels are spinning that they might just not be able to make it happen, and I can give them what they need remotely.
Sure. So then how does the process work then with like notes and revisions and that kind of thing? I mean, do you kind of like do your initial kind of like mock-ups and then kind of like get into more detail once kind of get some things, locked in, or do you make changes very often as you're going through? Maybe kind of walk through that process a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I basically will take the director has and give them a rough first pass, is what I like to call it. Just make get all the shots down, all the story beats, make sure the shots are flowing visually, like I said earlier, and I'll send them off a rough first pass. They'll make notes or not. They'll say, oh, this looks good here. Let's actually plug in a little wide shot here, make this one a little bit tighter, and then I'll go back and do another round of. Usually at that point, I'll tidy them up a little bit. There's a handful of directors I'm pretty comfortable working with to where I'll be like, I'll take your notes and I'll go ahead and just tidy them up for you and send them to you. I've had jobs where a director's in a pinch and they don't have a lot of time on their hands, so like the rough boards would be sufficient because I like to describe my rough boards as great for camera crews because you understand the blocking and the where the camera's going to be, where the action is going to take place. But if clients are going to be seeing them, you definitely want to have a little bit cleaner boards and a little bit more presentable ones.
Yeah. Now, are you doing most of this by hand? Or are you doing it on, the computer or both, I guess?
When I do it, I do draw by hand, but I draw it on a tablet. So when I
Okay.
started out, I drew everything on paper and pencil and pen. But nowadays, professional storyboard artists are expected to work digitally. So I work on a Wacom Cintiq, which is basically like an iPad. Even people use iPads nowadays because the drawing software and the stylus and the pressure sensitivity can replicate pencils really well.
Hmm.
So what I do is I basically draw by hand. I'll draw in Photoshop and I'll use other programs like SketchUp to help basically create effective storyboards. So it's a combination of working by hand while digital.
So typically, how long does that kind of like take then? I know it's kind of like a loaded question, but depending on what's in the frame, but how, like from a timing standpoint, do you like kind of like have a target? Like I want to get so many frames in a day, or so many frames in an hour, or a scene a day. Like how do you work from a timing standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, every job is different. So I kind of like have my kind of staple of what I'm capable of doing. Like I could do like these many polished boards in a day, or these many rough boards in a day, or I'll think of like in terms when they need the film or they need the boards by. So I really kind of take each one as it goes because it's not. I spend my day not just drawing. I'll be in meetings or doing taking notes with the director and stuff like that. So it really varies. So commercials obviously have a much faster turnaround,
Sure.
usually a day or two. Whereas feature, films can take weeks at a time. Short films usually 2 weeks. Feature films I've worked on them from as short as two weeks to the longest I ever worked on a feature film was 4 months, where I drew out every single frame, beginning, middle, and end of the entire film. So I really kind of take each job as it goes, but in the broadest sense, I look at commercials, within a couple days complete. Films anywhere from weeks to months. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Do you mind if we take a look at a couple of them and maybe talk about them?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Yeah, so we'll look at. I guess this would be the first one, 000A.
Mhm.
Um, looks like it's called The Jump. Can you kind of like walk us through what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so that is a short film I worked on a couple of years ago, titled "The Jump," and this is just a typical layout of what a storyboard would look like when I send them off to clients. Again, going back to what the difference between a comic book and a storyboard is, you can kind of see here that these are a little more presentable. They're a little cleaner. They're not like stylized pages the way comic books are. And so in this case, you get a sense of like what's happening with the action, and you can see beat by beat what I try to convey with what's happening with the characters. In this case, they're standing on a ledge, and so storyboards were critical with this film because the actors were going to be standing on a ledge, and they had to be, make sure that they're safe. I believe they were strapped with harnesses. But in this case, so like when an actor looks at this frame, like, okay, I'm here, then I'm going to walk, and I'm going to do this. So this is really a typical professional storyboard layout.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking here, like looking at this, you really have to have not only just like the art skills to draw this, but you have to have a really in-depth knowledge of cameras and lensing and essentially what rigs are available to kind of set these things kind of up, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Like all storyboard artists are expected to, have a broad overview of filmmaking aesthetics and like what medium shot is, what a close up is. And going back to like I said, I was an assistant cameraman. I feel like I have an extra in depth knowledge because I really have that technical understanding. So directors love when I can go into meetings and one of the first questions I'll ask is, "Oh, what camera are you working on? Alexa, Red." What aspect ratio, and they're like, oh, you can speak the language of a DP. So it's great that I can kind of bring a little bit extra to the table from a technical standpoint as well as an artistic standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of looking at like the next one here. So yeah, let's look at B. What's going on in B?
This was another short film. In this case, there was in this part of the story a SWAT team is ascending a flight of stairs, then they kick in the door, and then so in this case, it was important to convey for the stuntmen in this, the SWAT team members of what's going to be happening. And of course, I wanted to, a script will just say something like, the SWAT team members go up the stairs and then they enter the door. But I really wanted to give a little bit extra. That could be drawn out so many different ways. But I really wanted to make it as, cinematic and, like entertaining as possible, and all the, like have some cool angles and not just have them like kind of like stiffly walking. You really want to give your boards, especially when you're working on a feature film, lots of energy, and really kind of make it feel like those frames are leaping, like the figures on the frames are leaping off the page. So that's one of the first things I learned about what makes an effective storyboard. So I always try and convey that when I'm working on movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's. Do you find that like a lot of your storyboards and the way you kind of have them like blocked out is really what ends up being the shot, like the final shot? I mean, or is there, kind of? I assume a lot of the times it's not going to be an exact one for one, but it's got to be pretty close, right?
Every situation is different. I've had scenes and commercials where my boards are verbatim, which is a great feeling. But there are times where my boards don't make the cut for one reason or the other. So I don't take offense to that in any way if my boards don't make it. Like my boards are merely a blueprint, and in filmmaking is such an organic, constantly evolving process. The whole, from as early on when I work on storyboards in pre-production to editing, so many things happen, so many people are involved. So it's my job is done, and if I love seeing what I contributed, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't happen, then I mean my boards don't is it my the scene is not exactly what my boards are. It is what it is. It's not even that something that bothers me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm looking at now 001. It's one of the Liberty Mutual ones. I
Mhm.
mean, that one is like identical. It's kind of cool to see your shots on the left.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
that was a fun commercial. That got a lot of airtime earlier this year. And yeah, this was a pretty simple, straightforward one where you pretty much had the camera, locked the entire time and really only just changed lenses. So yeah, that was one where it was great that it was. I saw my boards and I was like, wow, this is. Or I saw the commercial. Wow, this is exactly what I drew.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see here. What about the one? Like, what about the one right underneath that, number two, with like the cars? What's
Yeah,
this one all about?
that was a State Farm commercial I did a couple of years ago, where it was a very interesting commercial from a technical standpoint because the camera was completely locked on the car the entire time, and we followed the car's journey. So basically, what happened was the car is found in a junkyard, it's towed, it's painted, it's fixed up, and then you can see the final frame where an owner, you know, pretty much like the whole thing is like taking pride in finding a backstory for like these items that were once considered, junk. And
Hmm.
so you'll notice that the car is completely stationary in all those frames. So it was my job to convey that visually to where not only for the cinematographer understanding how he's going to lock, have that camera locked and everything move around it, but basically just that was very beneficial for a technical standpoint to understand, be able to convey that in my boards to for the rest of the camera crew. 'Cause they had a lot of camera rigs and a lot of practical effects went into creating that one.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. And then looking at, let's go over one more, number four. It
Mhm.
looks again pretty similar to what you had drawn on the left.
Yeah, that was a credit karma commercial I did a couple of years ago. I feel like storyboards were perfect. The benefit of storyboards was a perfect example for this one because you had a dog who literally walks on its hind legs into the elevator. So the director was able to show the dog trainer the storyboards and say, okay, so this is how the shot's going to be. We need the dog to go from A to B into the elevator and then turn around. So yeah, that was actually a really neat commercial to be involved in.
Yeah, they even used your trash cans on the
Actually,
on the last shot.
you know what? I can't take credit for those. The director actually had the set built already, so
Okay, okay.
I'm like, it would have been stupid to not draw it. So yeah, I wish I could take credit for that, but no, they literally had that pretty much all ready to go, and that's why she sent me those photos.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. So when you're working with a director, or maybe it's like a new director, what advice would you give them? Like, what kind of stuff should they be prepared for? What kind of questions should they be ready for when they initially start working with someone like you on a project?
Well, I mean, like I love working with directors for the first time and introducing them to storyboards because they're always like, not I won't say uneasy, they're just like new to the process. And I've never been in a situation where a director, first time director, decided to go with storyboards and regretted it. They were just thrilled at what storyboard artists can bring to the table. And so I always just tell them, I say, like, look, think of me as, a second set of eyes to where I'm here to help you, but I don't want the credit as a director. And that's one of my favorite things about being a storyboard artist is that it's such a creatively heavy position, but at the same time, it's so behind the scenes and under the radar. And I love that. So I say, I'm like, I'm here to help you. And again, I've been in situations where directors know exactly what they want, and I'm just here to draw something for them. I've been in situations where directors have, broad strokes and ideas, and I've been there to help kind of fill in the gaps. And then, and other times where they're completely slammed and they don't have time to do the storyboards over with me, I, take it upon myself, knowing what I know about films, to make it, to basically give them what they need. So, I mean, every job is different, which is another thing I love about it. And so I just tell them like I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you visualize this, bring your script to life visually.
Yeah, I can imagine that is in, for any director, just incredibly helpful, and especially for a new director that might not want to know, or not know exactly what they want, and then you provide something for them to react to, or give them a direction like, what, I wasn't sure, but now I'm definitely sure that's what I was thinking, or that's not what I was thinking, and kind of give them a platform to then make other decisions off of.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of common things that I've noticed when working with directors, particularly on films, is sometimes they'll even draw out their own little storyboards. I mean, they'd be like stick figures,
Sure.
and they would draw like a few frames here and there just to convey like a particular beat of action. But I go in there and then I'm like, you know what? I know what I see what you're trying to go for. Let me help you, like firm this up, like in going back to what I said about that creative tissue. So like they might have that wide shot or that medium shot later on, but it's kind of hard to explain what like the creative tissue is until you actually show it to them visually. So if you were to go back to one of the first couple frames I showed you, where the first shot is characters walking in the frame and a guy's waiting for, they might have that frame, but then they might have like the frame like 3 frames down. But it's important you want to have those in between shots to indicate, the action that happen, that all that action happens. It doesn't just like jarringly cut from okay, they're here, but now they're on the edge of the cliff. What happened? How did we get there? So that's what a great thing about being a storyboard artist is like I can speak that language, and they kind of may know that subconsciously, but they're not quite sure how to express that visually through a storyboard, like like draw it out or anything like that. Because like for example, in a script, you might have like 3 pages of dialogue and action, but that might only need to be conveyed in 2 frames. Whereas you might have 2 beats, or excuse me, 2 lines of description in the script, but that might end up being like 15 panels. So it's very, if that makes sense, it's very based on just because the script will say one thing doesn't mean that it's going to be exactly conveyed just simply in the storyboard.
Yeah. So how much do I'm looking at that same example again. And I'm looking at the second page looks like the top of the at the top it's marked frame two.
Mm-hmm.
And after the guy turns around and exits the frame, and he has a lot of detail within like his features. Is that something based off of who was going to be cast?
Usually it depends if the person's already been cast or not. Normally, I'm not expected to draw likeness, just because there's not a lot of time for that, especially with shooting boards and sequential boards. They are more about more frames and less detail. When you're involved doing concept art, then you'll want to get into more detail. In this case, the character was just kind of an older guy, like white hair, beard, like old 50s or 60s. They end up casting Xander Berkeley in the role. At the time, there was an unknown, so I just really just kind of off of what I know about I just kind of keep it as simple, but obviously I want to convey if a 50 or 60-year-old old man in this case. But there have been other times where if I know someone's casting the role, so for example, with commercials, maybe they'll have talent already picked out. So I don't
Hmm.
have to be exactly precise, but I'll try and get close, especially in the age range, or if she's a brunette, or if he's a redhead, or well, I mean, boards are black and white, so that won't matter. But
Right, right.
just give you an idea. So
But
it's
redheads are good looking people, so I can understand why you would want to, like spend some time to make sure you get that right.
yeah, yeah, everyone wants to
Yeah,
have him do justice exactly.
yeah, yeah. Well, cool. So, what's the best way? Like, so if someone's coming to work with you, what's the best way to, start a project? Is it go to your website or giving you a call, or I mean, do we have
Um,
to go through your agent?
I'm very reachable. Yeah, I am rep by Storyboards Inc. It's a professional storyboard agency here in Los Angeles, women owned. I've been with them for 2 years. They're fantastic, and I still get a lot of I get outreach from people through email and phone calls as well. All my contact information on my website. So yeah, social media is a great thing nowadays. I'm very active on Instagram, and I get messages all the time through social media on Instagram about particular jobs.